Welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment of our show brought to you by Madisonville Marine. Last Sunday, I was down in Monroe County with some friends, and you started to see some boats out on the lake. If you want to be in a boat on an East Tennessee lake this year, you need to get down to Monroe County too, because that's where you'll find Madisonville Marine. Biggest selection of brands and models you'll find anywhere from Atlanta to Nashville. You've got a huge showroom with boats of all kinds of makes and models. And outside you have a huge lot of boats, all makes and models. New, used, you name it. They've got one with a great price for you, and their service and their follow-up and their service work, best in the region. Madisonville Marine. All right, want to welcome in the next member of our panel right down there, Jimmy Hyams from Sports Radio WNML, host of Sports Talk. Welcome, Jimmy. I think everyone believes that Donnie Tyndall is a pretty darn good basketball coach. I mean, X's and O's wise, pretty good. The question is, the NCAA cloud kind of still hangs over the program. Jimmy, in that last segment, we talked a little bit about with Butch Jones, he had that Team 117, and you knew it was onwards and upwards from there, and that put a better feel on Team 117. I don't know that you've got that right now because of the carryover, and we've discussed this the last few weeks, because the carryover of the NCAA investigation. Donnie Tyndall says it hasn't impacted him, it hasn't impacted recruiting, but we know it's out there. Is this program ready to take a step forward? And my question is, UT was going to take a step back with Cuonzo Martin this year anyway. But now looking in hindsight at the change with who you brought in, you're going to 25-16. Let's take a look at what the rosters might have looked like. Okay, we got a little graphic here. Team Donnie and Team Cuonzo. All right, now there's who you would have had back next year probably. Now you're going to have some guys on that team on the left that aren't going to be back, but that's who's eligible to come back. On the right, you got Larry Austin, who went to Xavier, Phil Cofer, who played 22 minutes a game at Florida State, Jordan Cornish, who played 16 minutes a game at Las Vegas, C.J. Turman, 18 minutes a game at Florida Atlantic. My question, you would have had Cuonzo Martin. Would you be heading back in the right direction in this year in what would have been his 5th year or 6th year? And then you've got Donnie Tyndall. Are you heading in the right direction? So what's the best situation? Jimmy, I'll start with you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I figured you like that.
I'm going to probably lean a little bit toward Cuonzo Martin. And one reason is they got 2 point guards that he would have.
Austin and
Thompson.
You don't lose Darius Thompson.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that would help you. I think Cofer's really good.
Yeah.
And he's a better inside player than anybody that Tennessee has right now. So given that, and given the minutes that you mentioned these players are playing elsewhere, I'm going to say I'd lean more toward the Cuonzo roster.
I don't even think it's leaning. I think it's pretty obvious to me because the 2 names I wrote down were Cofer and Thompson. And what were the 2 glaring weaknesses of this team? Mike mentioned that you didn't have anybody to throw the ball to in the paint. Cofer at least gives you a physical presence. And Darius Thompson, remember, he was the last guy to announce his transfer, correct? And I think that was really a blow. I think that hurt more than what we realized at the time.
Yeah, he sat out this year at Virginia, Darius Thompson did, for folks who don't remember. Mark, when you throw the X's and O's into it, does that skew things back in Tyndall's direction, do you think?
Yeah, I do. I think they're right on with the roster because of the positions of need that this current roster doesn't have, and because of the NCAA stuff, it's making it really hard for Donnie to go out and get those pieces. But I think from an X's and O's standpoint, for instance, Vanderbilt game, coach goes in at halftime, Coach Tyndall does, sees some key adjustments that they need to make defensively, which they haven't really done all year. They go out and do it, and they're able to pull out that victory. From an X's and O's standpoint, I think there's no comparison with Coach Tyndall.
Really? You think he's just night and day better than Cuonzo Martin? Okay. Mike?
Yeah, I agree with what they said. With Cuonzo's roster, you would have had a little more presence to throw it to inside. You would have had Darius Thompson would have played 30 minutes a game probably. So. But I also agree with what Mark said about the X's and O's.
Now, if you take the NCAA stuff out of the mix and you look at the roster for next year and what the roster would have been, and the roster for Cuonzo Martin, in hindsight, was better than people were giving it credit for being going into that year. We assume. We don't know how those guys would have played for Cuonzo Martin. That's the other thing. I mean, Dane Bradshaw for Buzz Peterson, our friend Dane Bradshaw for Buzz Peterson was one player, for Bruce Purley was another player. So we're guessing as to how these guys would have played under one or another. But you take the NCAA thing out of it, does that change you two on the end? Does that change your take, Team Cuonzo or Team Donnie, in terms of the future?
Well, that's hard to say because I don't know who he would get.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say no.
Okay.
Now, he's got 2 players coming in. I don't know how good they are. Shamari Phillips is one of them. Schofield, Admiral Schofield's the other. I don't know how good they're going to be. But without knowing who else he could have brought in, I'm going to stick with Konzo.
Yeah, and I agree.
Well, the other thing about it, though, is okay, so say Konzo's roster, that was the roster that you just showed. Would Dave Hart, I know we're sticking with Konzo with that, would Dave Hart have stuck with Konzo?
Well, we know that
if
answer.
after this year, right, so we're in the same situation to where even if that roster was better off and they finished 18 and 16.
But that's my question.
Yeah.
That's my question. You make these, now looking in hindsight, Dave Hart is the one who went out and vetted Donnie Tyndall. Dave Hart's the one that chose to ignore what happened at Morehead State and roll the dice that nothing else would come out. Dave Hart's the one that blew it on that. All right. Now, in hindsight, did Dave Hart make the right decision? Or should he have said, you know what? We're selling more tickets. They sold more tickets under Konzo than they did this year, it seems, for most of the year, unless there was a last-second jump in attendance. Sold more tickets under Konzo. You didn't take a national black eye if you keep Konzo, which you took. In hindsight, do you think Dave Hart looks at it any differently, or is he so far?
Oh,
I think it's clear he was so far off that Konzo boat.
I think Dave Hart touched on it when he said, look, our roster was decimated after that decision. You only had 4 returning players. If you don't have a coach in that comes in like Donnie Tyndall, this could have been a disaster. And then instead it turned into something where they got about all they could out of that. So I think when you look at it, you better be very careful when you walk down that path after you've had a team that made an NCAA run.
It's going to be interesting because you're right, and this is what's tough for Donnie Tyndall. And he still may be found, he may escape this, all right, may get out of it, we don't know. But it wasn't a disaster, but it could be if they have to go through another change. I think that would be a disaster to have to make another move.
Or the other hard part is if the NCAA continues to let this thing play out for a year or 2 years, and then it's holding over the program where it's harder to recruit.
And what about 8 years?
Yeah, like Syracuse.
Well, and if that's the case, if this drags into next year, if UT looks at it and says this is going into 2015-16, Tyndall's still is Tyndall going to be your coach? Are they going to sit there and say we're standing by you, even though this could drag on to year 2?
Wouldn't it be nice if that was Mike Slive's parting gift as it leaving as the commissioner, would be to help get this resolved before he goes out in August?
Greg Sankey, the new commissioner.
Or also, when you see the allegations that are out there, Tennessee may make its decision before the NCAA has a chance to have its hearing.
And we will discuss that a little bit later in today's show. When we come back, we're going to take a look at spring practice. We're going to talk about the running backs. Come on back on the Sports Source.